Alright guys, I wanted to take a little bit of time here today to talk with you about the right way to advertise baseball sims. Now, don't get me wrong, I know I haven't created one, I haven't tried to advertise one myself, but there are a couple things that I've observed. So I was looking through another one of those old Street and Smiths magazines and saw a bunch of different advertisements. Thought I'd share some of these with you. First one that comes up is for time travel baseball. Now, last time we talked about this, there was somebody in the comment section who mentioned that they'd played this game before. I don't know much about how to play it, and I can tell you that this advertisement doesn't really tell us much. I mean, it says there on the side that in 1981 it earned the U.S. Patent Office's recognition as the most imaginative and realistic major leaguer game available. I'm not sure why the U.S. Patent Office gave that as an award. Anyway, there's other stuff in here as well about loading up your lineup with Hall of Famers, imagining Ted Williams and Jim Rice on the same team, and so on and so forth, which is interesting but not unique to the game. So now we'll move on to the next one. This looks familiar to most of you. Strat-O-Matic, 1985 season. I guess 1984 season, 85 edition. And again, there's not much in here to really differentiate it. Looking through this for anything that explains how Strat-O-Matic is different, and there's not much there, just a bunch of general statements about the players included, and some talk about the basic version for youngsters and an advanced version for adults. Moving on, we come to this next. This is Micro League Baseball, and this is a game I know that a lot of you have played. I've messed around with it just a very, very little bit. There's a little bit in here about what the game is like. Not a pretend joystick game, it's a computer simulation game. But again, you manage a real team with all the strategies of big league managers. That's what every single one of these advertisements says, interestingly enough. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next. This is a game that we know well. This is the APBA game. But again, there's not too much information in here about how it's different other than you are the manager. You pick the starting lineups, call for relief pitchers, insert pinch hitters and pinch runners, and so on and so forth. Because each APBA card is produced individually, a number of options are available to you. That is true. You can do all sorts of different things because it's produced individually, but the problem is that every other game is also clearly produced with individual cards and or ratings. So interesting stuff to think about here. We go next here to replay. Now, I'm not a marketer, but I have to say that this is probably the worst looking advertisement for a magazine piece I've ever seen because you can barely read it. But again, it's just a general description of the game. I mean, among the positive points are the fact that they use a beautiful, sturdy cardstock, which was actually true of all the other games we just looked at, other than the computer game. There's a very general description of the innovative stolen base system and so on and so forth. So, I mean, there's a lot of questions here about, like, what's the difference between that and everything else? And then finally here we have Pursue the Pennant. At least here you can see a difference, right? Because the pieces are in color and you can stick your Donruss baseball cards on top, which is nice, but that doesn't have anything to do with how the game is played. In fact, the description here of how the game is played is just roll the dice and read the results off a color-coded player card or chart. And that's it. So, funny thing about Pursue the Pennant, of course, is that the color coding went away the next season, as I recall, or the cards at least shrunk in size and were a little bit easier to produce. So there you have it. So why do I bring all of this up? Because I know that there are a number of people out there who've made their own games, who are trying to market them and try to figure out what to do. We've already talked about the some of the problems with the websites of some of the better-known games, as you'll recall. One of the problems that we run into, though, and the thing that I think that it most hits at the problem is the fact that a lot of these websites, descriptions, and so on don't really talk about like how the game is played, and not just how it's played, but how the flow is, what the feel is like, what it's like to go through a game at normal speed, and so on and so forth, right? Now, I know that there are a lot of games out there, including games that the creators of which have commented on my videos in the past. There are a lot of games out there that have descriptions of how the game is played, what dice you roll, what charts you look up, and stuff like that, which is nice and helpful, actually, because then before you buy it, you read through it, and you're like, oh, okay, I see how this works. I see what's required of me. I see that I need to roll 2 dice or 3 dice, and how many sides there are on each dice, and what I need to look at, how many charts I'm looking up for these basic play results, and on and on. Right, it gives you kind of an idea before you get into it. But that's not really the feel of the game, right? Because the feel of the game doesn't come after you played once or twice. The feel of the game comes on when you've played a full season replay, right? So that's the thing that I really want to touch on. As I watch videos from people playing different games, that's kind of what I'm looking for. I'm looking to see, okay, where are we in terms of like what game are we on in our replay? And when we're on game, whatever, like 500 or something, are we playing quickly? Are we still having a hard time figuring out which board to look at, right? Did we get lost a little bit? Do we have to do so many re-rolls that we're losing track of what the last roll was, right? Or in the case of a computer game, is this literally turning into just pushing the same button over and over again? Which might be the case for the computer sims that I'm doing right now, right? I mean, that might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. That's the sort of thing that somebody trying to compare these games is really going to want to know, right? Is this a case of like the most repetitive thing in the world, or are there really a lot of options, a lot of meaningful things that you can do, right? If you're the one who's controlling the game engine, does it seem like a fun thing to do, or is it like, hate to pick on something, but is it like the old APBA master game where we have to do an algebra equation every time somebody might advance another base, right? I mean, that's what the big question is, and that's the sort of thing that people want to get used to. This is one of the reasons why on this channel, instead of doing quick reviews of games, I try to play as many games as I possibly can and try to do a big project, because I know that if you're interested in a game and you want to know how it really flows and how it's really played, you're going to have to play more than like a game or a series or even a postseason. You're going to need to really get into the grind day to day, and that will give you a feel for what goes well and what doesn't go well. That gives you a feel for what you like and what you don't like. I see a lot of people on the channel commenting and saying, well, I like having a card for every single player. You might like that for now, but if you have a player who had like 2 at-bats in real life and who has an amazing hitter card, you're trying to figure out what to do with him as you're managing that team in a game in July, it might give you a different feeling. You might sit there thinking, well, I want to put this guy in more frequently than he did in real life. What do I do about this? How fastidious do I want to be? How much of a slave to the real life manager do I really want to be about this, right? There's a lot of different things like that that come out that you might not think of when you're buying the game to begin with, but that become pretty important later on, right? In contrast to that, if you have a game that does some sort of major league equivalency for minor league players, you bring the guy up and you can see, well, this guy has this big weakness or that big weakness in his game. Maybe it's a little bit better. Maybe it's something that you know, is a little bit easier for you to stomach. So anyway, there are different ways I think that a producer of games could go about this, but I think that the real key is to try to do the best that you can using a platform like YouTube to not only show how the game is played with just the basic mechanics, but rather to give a feel for how the game is played. That's the thing that's really interesting, at least to me. I want to get a feel for how it's played. I want to know what it feels like to play this game day in and day out, to go through the grind of the replay, and whether it's going to be something that I'm really interested in playing, whether those fancy mechanics are really going to strike me as unique and original and innovative after, I don't know, 500-600 games, or if this is going to turn into, you know, I could just play this game blindfold, it doesn't matter, or, you know, the dice have all the say, I don't have much say over what actually happens in this game, or what I consider kind of to be the worst of all worlds, where I'm just pushing the enter button on my keyboard over and over again, and I feel like I'm at the slot machines, right? So that's the thing that I think you really have to go for, right? Now, whether you try to do a major project yourself or you try to find somebody who's well known on a place like YouTube and say, hey, why don't you do a project with this game? I mean, that's up to you, however you want to decide to advertise. I will tell you, though, that that type of advertising is probably going to be a lot more effective than writing some generic copy about how cool it would be to have, you know, Jim Rice and Ted Williams in the same lineup. I mean, it is pretty cool, but every game offers that. You've got to figure out a way to differentiate yourself. So just a little bit of thought. I'd be interested in knowing what the rest of you think, especially the rest of you who are used to playing these games. And I know that some of you probably have seen a lot of these ads before and are probably laughing your head off at me. And that's the way that it is. Hope you're having a good day. I'll talk with you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.